Hi, this is David Thornburg, President and CEO of the Committee of 70. Welcome to another edition of Studio C70, where we take the opportunity to talk with folks both locally and from around the country about how we can strengthen our local democracy here in Philadelphia. And today we're going to kick off sort of a new mini series, an occasional series, to talk about poll workers, what I think of as kind of the first responders of democracy here in Philadelphia and elsewhere. And to kick that off, we've asked Kate Rivera to join us. Welcome, Kate.
Thank you.
Kate is a poll worker, relatively new but dedicated poll worker who's been working the last couple cycles. She is an independent nonprofit consultant who had also spent a number of years working with the Urban Affairs Coalition, a great civic leadership organization.
Absolutely.
And so we wanted to talk to Kate about sort of life in the trenches of being a poll worker and get some of her thoughts on why in the world she decided to do this in the first place. And then maybe segue from there and talk about how we can improve and support poll workers. So, Kate, let's start with your own story. Just kind of rewind and talk about how you decided to become a poll worker in Philadelphia, and maybe scroll back to what your initial impressions of what that job was all about.
Yeah, so I first got interested in being a poll worker in 2016. After the 2016 election, there were a lot of people who were really interested in getting more involved politically since Trump was elected. And so there were some organizations that were hosting events about how to get more involved, and I was already someone who read the newspapers and followed local politics, but I went to one of those events just to learn a little bit more about what else I could do, and they were definitely organizing people to run for committee person, which was, I think, coming up a year or two later. But they also talked about there being an immediate need for poll workers and how to run to be a poll worker, which I had no idea that was an elected position before this.
Yes.
And so I was really interested in that because voting is a really important fundamental right, and the idea of being able to be at my polling place, making sure that everyone who wants to vote is able to do so, and that it's safe and fair and efficient, seemed like a great way that I could just be a small part of this big democracy that we're in.
Yeah.
So I got information about how to run. I had to go around my neighborhood a little bit and knock on doors and get some signatures on my petition to be on the ballot, which was the first time, only time really that I've done that for myself. And that was another just interesting learning about the process of running for office as well.
Yeah. It is literally the lowest rung on the
yes.
election ladder.
Yeah, and every person I talked to, I got to explain what it was I was running for, and everyone said, "Oh, you run for that?"
Well, it is, without getting too far in the weeds, it is a curious feature of life in Pennsylvania, which, if you've lived elsewhere or if other folks have lived elsewhere, is not the way everybody does it. But for the time being, that is how we do it here in Pennsylvania. Where do you live in Philadelphia, and where was your sort of where have you been camping out as a poll worker?
I'm in East Kensington, close to Fishtown. So my polling place is my local elementary school that my daughter goes to, Horatio Hackett Elementary School.
Great. So again, scroll back to 2017. So you get elected, you show up, crack of dawn.
Yes.
Kind of walk us through, like, what was the day all about, and what did you find surprising or not surprising? What was it like?
Well, I definitely was very nervous for the first time I went to go into work. I attended a poll worker training, and I had a little, but the training was like pretty fast, not really hands-on. I didn't feel totally confident that I would know what to do when I got there. Do a handbook, so the night before, I'm like reading and rereading my handbook, and like texting my friends, like, do you understand what this is saying? Because some of it's like very complicated, technical things about how you pull a tape out of a machine and, all these things. So I definitely, the night before, was having a lot of anxiety about like, when I get there in the morning and not know how to set up the machines, and there'll be a line of voters around the block, complaining about us. And it definitely felt like I had put a great responsibility in my hands to.
Yeah, and you don't want to screw up.
Right. But luckily, once we got there, there's my polling location has 2 different divisions within that location. So there was myself, and most of the other workers for my division were new. But the other division has some folks who had been doing this for probably decades. And they got their machine set up like, really fast. And then they were able to come over and help us make sure we got ours set up in time.
Yeah.
Which is really helpful.
We'll talk about this later, but sort of the system depends on people who have been around the block a few times, although sometimes that works to the disadvantage because people learn bad habits, or they learn what they think the process should be over time.
Yes, so, agreed. Yeah.
So 27.
It was definitely, it was helpful to have this person helping us set up, but she also gave us bad advice. Like, she told us not to bother setting up the ADA accessible device that you're supposed to plug into the machine. She said, oh, nobody ever uses that. You don't need to set that up.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, no one did ask for it, but it's still something that you should be prepared to offer to people.
Yeah. So you show up, I remember you and I were talking about this. I did my time as a poll worker, a couple different cycles when we lived in Germantown a long time ago. And my recollection, it was a long, long day, punctuated by moments of anxiety. As you said, is that ring true, or do you have your own?
Yes, that's a great way of describing it. It's certainly, once you get, there's the initial rush of getting there, making sure you get everything set up before the polls are supposed to open. And then there's, a morning rush of people who are coming in before work. And then there's a pretty long lull in the middle of the day when there's not many people coming in, but there's still sort of a steady trickle. So you can never really just, kick back and do something else, even if you're trying to read a book or do some work or whatever. There's still people coming in. So you still have to be kind of ready and prepared to help people. And then the evening rush after work. And, I think, and it's also, you just never know what you're going to encounter, what problems are going to come up. And we had a problem one election where one of our machines was malfunctioning, or we've had problems where someone saying the machine was malfunctioning, but actually it was a primary, they were registered for one party, they were trying to vote for a different party and didn't understand why it wasn't working.
Yeah.
And a lot of people coming in confused about where they're supposed to vote, where they're registered to, if their registration switch went in on time, and things like that. You just never really know what people are going to be bringing in to the polls with them. I remember I think my first election, someone came in during the evening rush after we'd already been there all day and we were tired and it was busy. And she was looking at the ballot questions, the papers that explain the ballot questions. And she said, I don't understand these. How am I supposed to vote on these? And she was getting really angry at us. And, we had to, try to explain to her, we can't we can't really tell you, we can't tell you how to vote or really, much other than what's on that piece of paper, because we have to be nonpartisan.
Yeah.
And, this person was probably just having a bad day, and we happen to be the ones to take the brunt of that.
It's as you pointed out, the one of the challenges of this job is that it involves interpreting some fairly arcane law that is only sort of brought into play a couple times a year. It's arcane law, and it's kind of a complicated process too. You have to register, you have to pick a party, you have to know where to vote, how to vote. So you get voters who maybe do this once or twice a year, hopefully twice. And then you have poll workers, even if you're good at what you do, you get a little rusty from, maybe the spring to the fall. So it's kind of creaky and fragile.
Yes.
I suppose we should be delighted that it works as well as it does.
It's actually pretty amazing to me that it works as well as it does.
Yeah. The other thing I remember, and maybe you share this, is you do get, because there's a lot of time to just sort of sit there, as you said, it's not quite quiet enough to read a book.
Right.
But you do have plenty of time to get to know the other people on the election board.
Yes.
Better hope that, did you know the folks, or have you known the folks that you've worked with since you've been doing this, or they're newcomers? Or
I did not know them in advance. And we had a good, we've had a good mix of, myself and the judge of elections were both newly elected a few years ago. And then there were two other individuals who would work with us who had been doing it for longer. Although they tended to, one interesting thing I've noted actually with our division and with the other division in our location is that some of the poll workers, they show up every year, but they still want someone else to be the one to tell them what to do. We had a good mix of folks. We had some good conversations. We heard from the folks who had been doing this for longer that they didn't like the people who were doing it before us, and they had some stories about some of the stories other people told that seemed inappropriate and things like that. But we've definitely had some nice conversations. It's a great way to get to know your neighbors, both your other poll workers, and also seeing all the folks who come in to vote. I've seen people that I knew that I didn't even know lived in my neighborhood come to vote.
Yeah. So
it is a really nice neighborly feeling.
Yeah. So just to sort of sum up on the positives, what if some friend of yours approached you and said, "Hey, Kate, I was thinking about working polls. Should I do it?" How would you sell them on it? What are the positive benefits of being a poll worker?
Well, I was talking about needing to know your neighbors and seeing your neighbors. It's really nice to feel like you're really part of a community. It's really sad. I mean, it's nice just to know that you're playing a small role in making sure that our democracy is free and fair for everyone who wants to vote, as long as they've registered to vote, that they are able to vote. It is, although it is a little bit anxiety provoking when people come in with issues that you may not be expecting, it's very satisfying to be able to resolve those issues or give them good information about what they should do in the future. We've had a lot of people come running into our polling place saying, like, I was at this other place and this place and no one knows where I should go, and we would take the time to, help this person look up their voter registration and figure out where they were registered to and where they needed to go vote. It was definitely satisfying to be, to encounter these kinds of issues and be able to resolve them.
Yeah.
I think those are a few of the, and it's, it is a very long day, but it's, it's just twice a year. And, it feels good. I usually go to like some sort of election watch party afterwards. So it's an even longer day for me, but it's nice to go and watch the vote results come in and feel like I was a part of that.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. So I want to talk to you about your suggestions about the whole job and how it could be better supported. But to get from here to there, I want to throw this question at you, which is, I'm sure you have seen, because we're living through this, all kinds of assertions, challenges, conspiracies about voter security, voter fraud. Without naming names, there are folks that are trying to undermine people's sense of trust in the process. So I'm curious, having spent time as a poll worker,
Yeah.
and literally, facilitate the process of the votes coming in one by one, does that give you any particular insight into the possibilities of the kind of fraud that or conspiracies that people are throwing around?
It's an interesting question. I mean, having been a part of the process, I would say that generally the people who are working at the polls and running the elections, they're doing it because they care about the election. No one's in this for the money.
Yeah.
Right? It's a at least 14-hour day, and you get some money for that, but not a lot. And so I think, I know there was that recent story about a poll worker who was essentially stuffing ballots. So I can say that there are no bad apples out there. But I think for the most part, people are there with the right intentions. And I'd be much more concerned about kind of large scale tampering with the vote. I personally am not a big fan of the new voting machines that the city commissioners purchased. My understanding from talking with folks like Protect Our Vote Philly and other, doing my own research and talking with folks, it seems like there are other options out there that could have been more secure. And so that's a concern for me. But in terms of the kind of day-to-day being at the polling place, or even with the mail-in ballots, I think that the people who are working the polling places, running the election, they have the best interests of the voter at heart.
Yeah. So let's pivot to the last topic for today, and that's how you as a poll worker could be better supported, better trained. Obviously, this June 2nd primary was conducted under extraordinary circumstances. You were telling me earlier that you were told that you weren't needed at the polls, so you actually didn't serve on June 2nd. But what would be on your list on your to-do list if you were talking to the city commissioners or other folks about how you could be supported to do your job better as a poll worker?
Yeah, I'd say number one on my list is the training. The training, the way it's conducted now, it's pretty perfunctory. You're in a room, full of people. There's like a brief PowerPoint they can kind of run through, and then somebody's in the front of their room with a machine. They kind of go tell you like, do this, that, this thing. Okay, we're done, right? And so it's not the best way to learn, especially not for me, and then you do have the handbook that you can try to read through, but it's kind of hard, if you're not in front of the machine. It's a little hard to understand some of the way things are written. So I would say, for one, having at least part of the training online, having a video online, so that there are certain parts that I want to rewatch or go back over the night before the election that I could, go watch a video and do that. And also really having a hands-on part of the training.
Yeah.
where where you can actually, put your hands on the machine and do what you need to do to get it set up or broken down, or, if there are issues.
Almost like a role-playing kind of thing, huh?
Yeah, yeah, because it's really hard. I mean, the new machines, I think, are a little bit easier to set up than the old ones were, and to break back down again, the old ones, there was a process at the end where you had to pull out the paper tape that had the list of all the votes on it, which was, there was also a cartridge, so it wasn't the only record, but it was a very nerve-wracking experience the first few times I did it, because I was afraid if I did it wrong, I was going to ruin this, it was a very complicated instructions about how to pull it out, And the new machines are a little bit more straightforward, I think, but it's still really hard until you've actually been able to physically do it yourself, to make, to feel like what you need to do.
Yeah.
And to remember.
Yeah.
So the training, yeah, and I've, this is something that isn't just me. I've heard from pretty much every poll worker that I've talked to, that they found the trainings to be insufficient. I remember one year we had a new poll worker assigned to our location because one of our poll workers wasn't going to be able to be there, and he showed up and he said, I've been so nervous all night. I like the training didn't teach me anything. I don't know what to do. And I said, don't worry, we'll show you. It's not as hard as it seems once you get into it. But so the training would definitely, could use a lot of improvement. Another interesting idea, and this is actually from my friend and colleague Jen DeVore, who she ran for city commissioner last year. Unfortunately, was not elected. But I volunteered on her campaign, and she suggested, and other people have suggested this idea as well, that that they think about breaking up the day, so that as a poll worker, you don't need to work the full 13, 14 hours. The polls are open for 13 hours, and then let's set up and break down. You're there for 14 hours, maybe longer. And that's just a really long day for anyone. And so, the idea that if you break up the day a little bit, people may be more willing to step forward and, work part of a shift rather than having to dedicate that much time to it.
Of course, that would increase the challenge of training folks, because you have twice as many people working half as long. But,
yeah, it's a little bit counterintuitive, right? So you're trying to fill poll worker slots, and then you're creating more openings. And I think, I think if people wanted to work the full day, I don't necessarily see a reason why they couldn't.
Yeah.
But having an option, I think some people would be willing. I mean, it is hard. I have a young child, so I have to make sure that that her dad is going to be, is going to have her that day, and you have to get up early. If you get up early and you're there until late, so if you a job or other commitments, it's a lot. It's a lot to commit to for a day.
Yeah, I remind people that a good part, most of our election code was written in 1937. When the world looked quite different from it does today, and we have a big challenge just catching up to the different rhythms of people's lives, which are not what they were in 1937. Quick question: did you vote by mail this past spring?
I did, yes.
And how'd you find that experience?
It went smoothly for me. Thankfully, knock on wood. I know some folks had issues, but I just went and applied online. I made sure I did it early enough, and I tried to remind everybody I knew and posted on Facebook. Make sure you do it now. Don't wait until the last minute. The deadlines are tough because, at least for me, I didn't want to vote too soon because I was still seeing how the presidential primary unfolded, and I had a competitive state rep race in my division, so so just reading up on those candidates and understanding their positions and choosing who I wanted to vote for. I didn't want to vote too far in advance and then later get information that would make me want to change my vote. But so I waited until closer to the deadline, but still a couple of weeks out, to make sure that there was no problem with my ballot getting in.
That's an interesting perspective that you usually hear the early voting question from the standpoint of the candidates or the parties, whatever. But you're right. If you're a voter, you don't want to vote too soon because something might happen, or you might learn something in the ensuing weeks that might change your vote. So, but then you get, if you're not careful, right, you get caught on the deadlines.
Yeah.
And so you run the risk of that, if you wait too long, of that vote just not counting. Of course,
the communication around those deadlines is really important. I was
yeah.
on Facebook commenting on a lot of other people's posts, clarifying, because everyone thought of it as long as you get it in the mail, or as long as you get it in the mail by this date, then it'll be okay.
Yeah.
I say no, you have to get, it has to be received by that date, to be received by that date.
Well, I don't know if you're aware of this, but my backdrop here is the Volkswagen, which is the iconic car of the Committee of 70. We worked with the Commissioner's Office to help them with some mobile drop-offs around the city right before the election, and somewhere between 3,500 and 5,000 votes came into those mobile drop-off sites, which
That's great. Yeah, I was sharing the drop-off site information with people.
Yeah, there were a lot of anxious voters showing up, and grateful voters showing up with that in mind. Well, I'll let you go, Kate, but thanks for helping us to kick off this, as I said, this sort of occasional series on poll workers. I would note, I said this to you earlier, the Committee of 70 and some other folks have started a Facebook group for poll workers that I believe it's just called the Poll Worker Caucus. That you can find on our page, or just searching Facebook, and we're trying to do that to provide sort of an online community for folks who do what you do. The thousands, I think I read today there are 40,000 poll workers across Pennsylvania. So
wow.
Just see that as a challenge. That every cycle, that's an all volunteer army basically that has to be recruited. So this is a challenge that will be with us. Are you intending to work the polls in November?
We'll see what happens. I'm certainly, if I'm needed, then I'm willing to be there. It is a little tough. It's a little scary during a pandemic to think that you could be exposing yourself with COVID, but I think I'm younger and in good health, so my chances of getting severely sick are at least lower, and it's still important. It's this election's very, very important, and so if I'm needed to make sure that our polling station is sufficiently staffed, then I'll be there.
Good. Well, thanks for doing what you do, and this is a big election. My rough count is there are going to be twice as many voters voting in the fall as there were in the spring, which means if you think about it, there's another huge hundreds of thousands of voters who are going to show up in the polls or vote at home who didn't vote at the spring, haven't used the new machines before, haven't done vote by mail before. So we've got our work cut out for us. But thanks again for joining us today, and best of luck, and we'll see you at the polls or around.
Thanks so much for having me.
Okay, bye.
Bye.